Um, so knowing that we can be that beacon, be that
Mm,
transmission of what we're calling co-regulation
mm,
is like the reminder of that innate capacity in ourselves or other people to be with ourselves, to be
yeah.
present, to attend to. Um, and and to mix that in with the fact that for some of us, again, this is the tricky tension, is like, let's say, Stephen, like you're this on your way to being this super co-regulator. And in order for me to get to receive that, I have to know it's safe enough to be in relationship to someone.
Yeah.
And this is the trickiness of going, you have something for me that would absolutely support my healing, but I
Mm.
have to lean into the sense and almost override that relationship doesn't equal danger. And this is where we get into the titration of safety.
Yeah, yeah. That's really poignant. So if relationship equals danger, which is the case for many people, and they use words like shy or other type or timid, um, the world is small and not rich. It's frightening. And you have to yeah. Okay, for me, what I've been learning is as I'm getting really, let's say, old, I'm learning that people's lives have been really, for many of them, tuned by their early childhood. And I'm just overwhelmed that certain things happen to them as children, let's say even before preteens, and that retuned them and reshaped their view of the world as being safe. Um, when I talk to these people, because they tend to be in my world, it's like academic researchers, and they talk about needing to be perfection, needing to fulfill the expectation of their parents, and I'm kind of sitting back and saying, didn't you know that that was just script? It didn't really matter. Didn't you know? Why did you take that seriously? I saw it, I experienced it, but I realized I had to navigate around it. But they internalized it. It became who they were, and it limited their feelings of success in life. And all these people should be feeling success, and all of them don't feel successful. It's really kind of this tragedy that when we create unmeetable expectations, we take away, we steal from the youth a feeling of satisfaction because we keep raising the bar. And we do that I talk about having survived academics as if I went through the worst of any world war. In ways, it is very difficult to survive academics. I don't mean maintaining a job. I mean maintaining integrity and dreams and creativity, because it's chronic evaluation and it never lets up, never lets up. And the answer is, it works fine if you just say, look, the evaluation is pragmatic. I have to get around it, but I don't internalize it as critical of me. I just say these are people who may not be curious, may not be nice, and may not be that smart. Um, but I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm writing about. So I have this very, I would say, strong sense of self within that community. But that's not where a lot of people reside. They can get humiliated easily and leave the profession. And I kind of navigate through this and say, come on, aren't you smart enough to realize there's certain attributes of what you're experiencing that are just a poorly played game? And it's poorly played by less talented and certainly people who aren't very nice. So, and what you need is to be around people who are talented and people who are nice.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah.
But I will
Just
tell you,
thinking.
the academic system, it's not a fertile system for both of those. It's just, and actually, my older son is an academic, and he navigates through it beautifully, and he has friends who are colleagues, which is really beautiful. And so, in a way, he's living the world that I think is the good world. And that is, when your colleagues are your friends, then creativity and exploration is a shared journey.
Mm, mm. I think, and I can hear how that lends itself more to a safer, more regulated experience.
Mhm.
You know, things to go back, Stephen. I remember talking to you a couple of years ago, and I grew up in the world of academics, where in science and medicine, where I was told like homeostasis is this set point, like that, this very narrow thing
Yeah,
that is like this is what it means to be regulated.
yeah,
And you blew my mind, and I just want
yeah.
to share that because I think uh, it changed my entire perspective, and and the way you said it gave me permission to also
Mhm.
change my perspective. It
Yeah.
was like being human is actually being in this optimal window of
Mm,
how we're regulating our energy, our attention, our emotions. And it's a big window, and it can
mm,
even get bigger and it can even get smaller. But it means about being in that window is being present with all of these things. And this optimalness is not like this very narrow perfectionist set point that I think is projected,
eh,
that being co-regulated or self-regulated
yeah,
individual is actually, there's big range of what
yeah.
that is and the expression of what happens within it.
So for me, okay, so first of all, you're absolutely right. And we can start talking about aging, where you can see that the range of movement and behavior gets limited with the system that as it ages. And it goes back to my work on heart rate variability, which is decades and decades ago, including, I would say, I started to look at aging. I never started looking at aging in the early 70s, even though I didn't publish a paper on aging until the 90s. And what you find in aging with heart rate variability is it decreases with aging. And because what the heart rate variability, it's not random variability, it's neural regulated variability that are really a window into these homeostatic cycles. And so homeostasis is not that fixed point. That's a naive, uh, inappropriate definition. Homeostasis is having the feedback loops that reset when you get out of range, it pulls you back. So when you have a greater range, you're at that midpoint, but you're going around it and there's no problem. You can pass through it. As you get older, those neural feedback or under stress or chronic stress or illness, the neural regulation of those systems decreases. And now you can be destabilized very easily. And but people use this. They say, look, I don't have any resource today. We have all our metaphors for our intuition of that homeostatic range. So we can have an overriding lot of demands on us. And we say, look, good question, good problem, but I can't deal with it today. Too much for me. So that's part of how we have to be aware of our system. And we have these gadgets like Fitbit that have, let's say, inadequate measures of heart rate variability, but they're there. And it can give us indices that, if we're overwhelmed, if we have a fever, our heart rate variability goes down, our heart rate goes up. And we say, listen, I need a little time for my nervous system to recover. So we can get greater awareness through the feedback loops that we have literally attached to us. And we can see it in other attributes. We can see it in our sleep cycles. And again, when you get overwhelmed, you don't sleep well. So to me, sleep is a really useful projection of our autonomic regulation. But to make a succinct reaction to yours, Scott, about homeostasis as being a set point, it was a misunderstanding, because even if we went back to Claude Bernard, who was talking about literally internal milieu and homeostatic features, that word came out in the 1920s by Walter Cannon. So if you want the science history of it, homeostasis came out then. And then in the 1940s and 50s, Norbert Wiener, who was a mathematician at MIT, came up with the word cybernetics, which was navigating through this sea. And I've always liked the word cybernetics. And there's a paperback published, I think, in 54 called Human Use of Human Beings. It's the Science of Cybernetics. It's a paperback, and you can probably find it online for free. But
Cybernetics.
these were people who were interested in feedback loops and not set points. And set points, the problem with set points, and this leads into the pharmaceuticals, because people want to take assays or blood tests and they want to titrate to shift the set point. And what they really need to be setting is the mechanisms of feedback that enhance range, and that doesn't occur. So even like titration with various forms of blood pressure medicine, they impact on the feedback loops that create the range that we need.
Yeah. And for those who are watching, specifically what are considered positive and negative feedback
Yeah.
loops are
Yeah. And
essentially.
what we're really talking about is negative feedback, because when it deviates, the system pulls it back in. And just think of a sine wave where overshoots, undershoots, overshoots. And that's really what heart rate variability in a healthy person looks like. And that's representing the vagal inhibition and the vagal recovery cycle is causing the rhythmicity.
And cybernetics, for those who studied family therapy, they bring in a lot of cybernetics there too, looking at why we continue, like how do we break cycles or patterns within
Yeah.
family, and what keeps us in the same loop, re-triggering each other, reactivating each other, recycling the same reenactment over and over again in family as well.
I didn't know that. So that's
Yeah.
useful.
Interesting, because cybernetics is brought into it like medicine, and it's brought in physiology, and it's also brought in
Yeah.
to psychology through family therapy. Yeah, family constellation work. Yeah, there's so much to say there. I want to go back to where do we want to go back to? I got excited by cybernetics. So I think one of the really key features here in understanding it from a physiological perspective, but also the carryover into psychology, in terms of that we don't have a set point but a range,
Mhm.
is that when people often say like, oh, they're triggered. This is a good example. It might, what it actually might mean is that they're still within their range of optimal functioning. They're still within their capacity to regulate and to choose, to have agency about how much response, how much energy, how much
Yeah.
attention is being put into all of this, and emotion, but they may not register it. And this is a really important difference between registering we have capacity and
Mm-hmm.
actually being in capacity. Because I might say, I'm triggered, I'm having a reaction, therefore I'm out of my range.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is we might not be assessing correctly that we have a lot more capacity than we actually have. And this is an
Yeah.
interesting thing.
Well, I'm not going to be real of much use to give an answer to that, because it is a real issue, and because I'm victim to that, because I start dealing with the anticipation of travel and giving talks and thinking that I can't handle it. In reality, I'm really quite flexible and I do real well with it. It's kind of like we don't want to overburden ourselves, but we may underestimate what burden we can take. We may think that we don't want to sleep for 5 hours one night because we think we're taking too much out of the bank, literally, for the next day. But the 1 hour, one day at 5 hours is nothing. It's not going to disrupt. I wouldn't say it's nothing. It's not going to disrupt your life. Uh,
Yeah.
the part of this is that, again, this is for me because of the aging and the fact that many of my friends are no longer with me. So I start to think about things in a more, let's say, pragmatically cautious strategy. But that is looking at normative data, not necessarily looking at me. And I think part of that is what Scott's saying. I'm saying, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing these things. I'm at a certain age. But the issue is maybe my physiology's at a different age. It's like I'm still functional and still think, still write, still can travel. Maybe I'm overly cautious because the culture marginalizes people also on age. It's kind of a strange thing that suddenly you spend your life being the youngest one to do this or that, and now you're the oldest one in the room. It shifts how we react to the world, and we start to, in a sense, sit back. But Scott, the main point you're making is we may not know our true resilience. And I translated that in my own life by saying, I didn't understand that I was a flexible person. I kind of grew up with this notion, with the feedback of my, let's say, closest people around me, that I was not flexible. Okay. And the answer is no, I'm really quite flexible. I can shift job places. I can create opportunity. I can create opportunities in different venues and different places. And I can be comfortable in different disciplines. So in many ways, even on a professional level, I've exhibited a lot of flexibility. And in, like Scott, I'm stepped into this clinical world, and I'm not a clinician, and I don't feel it at all uncomfortable within the clinical world.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for reiterating that through through your lens and your language. It's to register our own capacity is such, or help people register their
Mm,
capacity is such a potent tool. It's like saying, I might have, let's say to a client, for example, or a patient, like, oh, there's so much feeling here. And isn't it amazing that you could just how much you can be here with all that
mm,
feeling?
yeah,
And it's like them go, oh my gosh, I can be here with it. It's that reminder that often that sometimes we need of just how much capacity we have, and or the recognition of going, oh no, or for them to be able to say, I actually can't be here with it. Part of me is off somewhere
yeah,
else.
yeah,
To which I'll say, well, isn't it? It's so amazing that you can register that some of
mm,
you is here and some of you isn't. It's a
yeah,
strength-based approach, but helping people register just because they're having an experience in life or a strong feeling doesn't mean they don't have the container to metabolize and process it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we underestimate our flexibility or resilience. But that's for some of us. Some other people who are really striving so hard and not listening to their body, they're not getting any of these signals that says be careful, or they're not aware of what they're doing to, they're metabolizing their body literally, and then the body fights back. And if we go into kind of a polyvagal lens on that, we basically would say that people in their profession, their day-to-day life, are locked into a mobilization strategy, a highly sympathetic fight flight, literally, and that's metabolically costly. And the body just can't maintain that. And it will fight back on you, it will shut you down to save you. And this is burnout. This is where the body just stops. But that's a different type of understanding of what your range is. It that comes with people who are literally don't feel things. But there's another group of people, which I think I'm part of, and then saying I anticipate that this will be overwhelming. It's not that anything is overwhelming. I'm anticipating that I will need downtime. Not that I need the downtime, I'm planning for it. And so I'm trying to, it's kind of like the kids going to school say, I need a little recess. Well, I'm saying when I go give talks and things, I need a little downtime.
I really appreciate how you're linking the overriding of attunement to one's capacity
Yeah.
to burnout.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same way that is on the other side of a coin is um, not yet registering or picking up the cues of one's capacity and resilience.
Mm.
Yeah. Which can also kind of lead to burnout in a way too, of being like we perceive we're not as capable as we are. And
Mm.
so we're not in our capacity. We're not in
Well,
that.
the bit perceived, is a very interesting terminology, and that is we're literally saying I'm listening to those who have told me that I may not be able to do this. It's kind of like I'm taking a mental image that has vectors of input from a community or from history as well, and it may not map into the reality of the resilience of my nervous system.
Well said. Yeah, well said. Do you feel like we might take some of the questions that are in the
Sure,
Q&A box soon?
sure. I'll
All
take
right.
it.
There's definitely a few questions on coming back for us to come back to the titrations of safety, the tools of coming back to the titration of safety. And I apologize, I can't read the entire paragraph just so I can, I'm just looking at the foundations of it. But um, maybe we can each talk to some of the tools around when safety hasn't been safe, or we haven't been able, when we've had to attune to the cues of danger so much,
Hmm.
how do we sort of titrate our way back to observing and absorbing
Hmm.
cues and stimulus of safety?
Let's start with what are the cues of safety, and so we can talk about, can we titrate them? So the issue is cues of safety are going to be co-regulation from colleague, from friend, from a trusted individual. It can be in a form of playfulness, or the more the dynamic interaction of the two individuals or multiple individuals, the better. Many people during the pandemic, and of course, those with trauma histories, have found that their co-regulatory mammal may not be a human. So they have literally found cats, dogs, horses, as good surrogates, feeling safe with them and helping them come back into their bodies. So uh, we can, in a sense, slowly. Okay, so co-regulation literally is a default strategy. It's not that some people have written that our default state is fight flight. Actually, the default strategy is co-regulation that gets turned off when we have been detected threat. But the default, the true wiring, it's what I call our evolutionary heritage, is to be a nurturing, supportive, co-regulatory individual. But threat disrupts that, disrupts homeostasis. It turns off our physiological health and our mental and psychological health, and disrupts sociality. We just don't have sociality. So the paradox is it disrupts sociality, but sociality can be that neuromodulator that brings us back. But if we've been traumatized by humans, the intrusion or the intervention of sociality is a trigger. So this is why people end up in therapy. They actually acknowledge that they want to have, in general, want to have relationships, but relationships are triggers. So they understand that. So the part that psychology or psychiatry or psychotherapy has always been about, a lot of the talking, and now over the past 20 years, somatic aspects of therapy have come in. And really what we're all saying is the body under proximity and in social interaction gets disrupted, and the social interaction is now functionally a predator type signal. It's threatening. So the issue is titration is, as far as I can tell, the only portal into it. The other portal is, I would say, through objective processing of stimulation that is associated with social interaction, that is prosodic voices. And this is what I developed in the Safe and Sound protocol, which was really computer altered vocal music, and now it's computer altered classical music now. But basically, it triggers those, let's say, templates that are in our brain to become accessible, and then through good therapists, good therapy, in which people become aware of that visceral feeling of accessibility. Now that accessibility signal is no longer a signal of vulnerability. So it gets, over time, uh, the body relinquishes this. And this is part of, in the area of mental health and in the area of chronic illness, it's all about a nervous system that will not relinquish its defenses. It's stubborn. It doesn't trust what's going on. And this is why chronic illness is very much like trauma. The event has long passed, but the effect on the body is prolonged and profound.
I'll just add to that in terms of, one of the things when we talk about the word titration is a parceling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, or if we think of like taking little sips, like Stephen's doing of his tea, or tea, I meant coffee. What
Coffee.
do you drink these days? Coffee.
Coffee.
Um, yeah, like little sips. He didn't drink his entire coffee, gulp his entire coffee, throughout this 90 minutes, he's taking little drinks of it. And so there's if we translate that into titration of safety as and safety being related to co-regulation, it's like, okay, I might just look at my friend or my therapist's eyebrows.
Mhm.
I might just hear some sound of their voice and then turn away. That's a literal practice we can do. I might sit beside them
Mhm.
and work my way to be face to face. If eventually, there's a lot of ways to move into social interaction,
Mhm.
parceling or step by step.
Yeah. The interesting thing on a therapeutic model is a lot of people have the chairs of their client on an angle.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is they can follow the client's behavior. If the client turns and looks, they could look at the client, but they're not forcing the client to a face-to-face, because face-to-face in a body in a state of threat, face-to-face is real threat. So the issue is titrate. There's another magic word here, and that is the nervous system resolves the jolt. So just like sipping the coffee, the fluid drips into my esophagus and down wherever it goes, but it gets metabolized. It gets pulled in a way. Triggers get metabolized, and that's why titration is the way of the nervous system literally learning that that trigger is not going to injure the individual.
So well said. That it's just a wave
It's a wave, and
of
and the wave gives you, in biological, physiological terms, afferent feedback, the sensation of it. And now the learning process is that those sensations are not a lead indicator of being injured, and that's what this whole titration is about. I'm aware of that signal, and now I don't have to react to that signal. The signal becomes benign, or what I always like to say is we become curious about what that signal is. So rather than this, saying, oh, wow, I've processed, and even though I feel like that, isn't it peculiar that this little sound makes me want to do this? That is interesting.
So in some ways, is it uncoupling the
Yeah,
cue
yeah,
response and
yeah.
the idea that that all equates to that injury that
Yeah, when
had.
when I took that big step into the world of trauma, I said, this is, pragmatically, all you need to do is separate the event from the response. You, in a sense, you basically have to this, or then my friend and colleague Deb Dana starts using more tractable terminology, story from she uses to, you have the story from the feeling or something like that. And then I start using terms like the personal narrative has to become separated from the physiological feeling. And if we can separate those, then the narrative or the events lose their power. So when people, what happens is that the narrative starts to reinforce that physiological feeling, and now it becomes embodied in this really great way. So, Scott, I think you're really onto that main point, is that, yeah, we can have thoughts, we can have ideas, we can have stories, but it doesn't mean that our body has to be in a state of fight flight. We can not like the experience that we had when we were children, but we don't have to cringe.
Yeah, well said. I'm just going through some more of the questions. Um, I'm not going to say the person's name just in case they don't want to necessarily say it out loud, but there's a question about when someone feels both shut down and stress hypervigilance. So when the gas and the brakes are both being pushed simultaneously. Um, and what are the strategies in relation to what I think Peter calls that global high activation is when the Peter Levine calls it global high activation when the gas and the brakes are on simultaneously, essentially. But we all have
Well,
different language for that state.
Well, okay, you can have both on. I mean, so if you look at polyvagal states, so we talk about social engagement and facial expressivity, vocalization. We talk about sympathetic mobilization, and then we talk about dorsal vagal immobilization. Now, those are assumed idealistic or hypothetical discrete states, but in reality, we are coupling these things together. So if we keep that social engagement system on board, so we see the smiling face and we're running. If we see people running with smiling faces, we say they're playing, because that's how it communicates to us. And if we see them with adults, we say they're dancing. They're moving. The bodies are in good state. So you can have both that gas for sympathetics, and you can have that ventral vagal activity, which contains the sympathetic. So it's a break, but it's a break of containment. And that can also be experienced as exuberance. So there's a sympathetic excitation, but it's contained by this evolutionary neuroventral vagal circuit. Now, if we are immobilized and our dorsal vagus is working, we can feel safe through proximity and vocalizations, and our bodies conform. And now we have ventral vagus with dorsal vagus, and we're in a good state. And if the dorsal vagus was recruited in defense, that's irritable bowel, that's gut pains, that's genital problems. This is where the body goes into life threat. So we can mix and match to optimize our experiences. Now, if we talk about both a vagal break being on and a sympathetic tone, that can be, if it's the dorsal vagal break and the sympathetic tone, that's freeze. That's exactly what that is. But if it's the ventral vagus and sympathetic, that's play. So you start, if these are different mechanisms, and so we have to be very careful in what type of attribution we make, because we literally have two vagal breaks, one which is functionally a choreographer of a good life, and one which is a shutting down, which is really to minimize metabolic demands based upon a desire for the organism to feign death, to disappear, to dissociate. But the problem with that defensive reaction is we don't get enough oxygen to our blood, and that's where freezes come in, which enables us to immobilize and literally freeze, but still maintain sufficient sympathetic tone to keep our blood pressure and oxygenated blood going through our body. And I like to say the most evolved stage is dissociation. So we disappear and we don't challenge our own physiological survival. So if we were to step back and look at our adaptive defenses, we would certainly say that dissociation was really an amazing one that we should honor. Yet it becomes, in the pantheon of symptomatology, frightening to a lot of people, as opposed to saying this is really a remarkable strategy of a nervous system that has really done its best to keep you alive.
That's a beautiful reframe. Thank you. If those have more questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'm just reading through the great questions you've had so far. I think I'll add to that while we're waiting for a few more questions about also this idea of being in something I appreciate you saying is we can be in multiple states at the same time. That actually is our adaptability.
Yeah.
It's when we lose agency of mixing and being in choice, essentially, of what states we're in and coming out of any states.
So, I'd add to that, Scott, that we can be, when we're saying be in any state, we're really saying if the ventral vagus is on, we can co-opt or repurpose any other state. But once we take that off, our body goes into defense, and we don't have much control over any of that. The interesting one is when all three get used. And I think during the state of appeasement, and I wrote a paper with Rebecca Bailey and J.C. Dugart, and J.C. was abducted for 19 years. This is her story, her personal story. And both Rebecca and JC were very angry with the term Stockholm syndrome. And that's how they engaged me. They said, there has to be something else because I really did. She said, I detested the guy and people are accusing me that I loved him. And the answer is that she was able to maintain a adequate social engagement system that communicated to the predator that she was safe to him, and which meant she was under fear, she was under all these other things, but she had this remarkable, literally a super nervous system that didn't fall apart, that maintained it. So when I start talking about appeasement, it's not, I don't see it as a voluntary option for a lot of people. I think it's a nervous system that has just this remarkable resilience to be able not to, in a sense, disappear under life threat and or to go lock into a state of freeze. And this leads us to this contradiction where people say appeasement or fawning. And to me, fawning is about a nervous system that is not present, that the person is basically a type of immobilization, it's a type of dissociation. And then in the world of human interactions, fawning doesn't maintain the same attractiveness of a predator. So I think people who fawn may get severely injured or killed in these situations. And we're actually working on a paper on fawning now. And the way that I'm working with is with Rebecca has clients. She's a therapist. She's an equine therapist, actually. And I'm learning from her. Her specialty is with women who have been abducted, and we're getting firsthand information of how their nervous systems dealt with these events. So it's not, I'm not pragmatically telling them what they felt. I'm learning from them and then deconstructing it from a physiological perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a question on just re-clarifying or clarifying about dissociation, and what you were saying about maybe how it's one of the more evolved states, or
Yeah.
what we mean
So
by
what I meant by that, so what I'm really saying is that our first reaction, perhaps, let's give you kind of a developmental sequelae of what happens under chronic severe threat. Under the first threat, the body may go into this shutdown, passing out, defecating reaction. But that is potentially life-threatening. It doesn't support oxygenation of blood. So the next time this occurs, the body may go into a state of freeze, which has the sympathetic tone in maintaining it. And then if it's continued, the body may say, even freeze is too compromising for my physiology. I'll just move it, get out of there through a mental journey. I'll dissociate psychologically. So I think there's a sequelae of insults in which the nervous system tries to optimize literally quality of life from initial reaction, which is the wiring, the life threat, shutting down, disappearing, to freezing, to dissociating. So that's what I'm really saying. Now, I don't know if there's validity in what I'm saying, but the issue is that, yes, if we go into the world of dissociation, there's going to be a clinical history of abuse. And if we think of that initial actions of severe abuse may result in total immobilization responses and passing out.
Yeah, I think there's also something to say of like, if you think about it from an evolutionary biological perspective,
Hmm.
we are built to have the capacity to dissociate. So it
Yeah.
has a meaning in our evolution, meaning in our capacity.
Yeah.
And and so if we look at it from that perspective and go, well, what is the value of something that we are evolutionarily designed to have? And part of that is like what's called auto-regulation. The ability to not attend to something is
Hmm.
actually part of our capacity.
Yeah.
Dissociation is sometimes a tool to auto-regulate. The problem is when we don't know how to come back home to ourselves because we took that vacation,
Yeah.
that little
Well,
devotional self.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about creativity and daydreaming, and we talk about, various things. And the issue, I think, Scott, is you're absolutely on board or right. Um, the facility, how facile are we in getting back in? Yeah, that's and yeah, and I think being a child of the 60s, having experienced that world, people were experimenting with psychedelics at that time in the 70s. And the question, of course, is were you welcomed home again? Was this going to disorganize your ability to function in your body for the rest of your life? And I think
Yeah.
these are, I think the questions on psychedelics now are being, I frame them differently. See, I frame them within a polyvagal lens and saying that all interventions function differentially based upon the physiological state you're in and the support you have around you, the context. So that if you're in a safe, trusting relationship with good surveillance, with someone holding your hand, hey, you might be able to try all these things. But if you're taking it to escape from the world, I said be real careful. So I think again, this is really a turning point in mental health treatment using psychedelics because people are still looking at it as if it is a manualized treatment model. You take this, and I'm saying taking a pharmaceutical has differential effects based on the context and the safety that nervous system is feeling when you give them the drug.
Important discernment. Steve, I think our last kind of question that we can talk about is actually an exciting one. And it was a question on music and polyvagal theory. So maybe you can,
Oh yeah.
I don't know if this
So
is the time to
it's
talk about
okay.
your big project.
Well, yeah, I'm on a new, I call it Act 4 of my life, and that is developing what we call polyvagal music. I have a wonderful composer, performer colleague. His name is Anthony Gorey, and we've created polyvagal music. And polyvagal music is the development of music with biological rhythms entrained built embedded in the music to entrain the body to certain rhythmicities that are I would say optimal homeostatic rhythms. So basically, let's give you the true parallel. Dance and march music, we hear it, our skeletal motor system gets in and we move. What's underneath those systems? Our visceral organs. What is the music that turns our heart and our gut or supports their modulation? And that's what we've written. So we've written music that talks to the dorsal vagus to support the dorsal vagus in its healing of our organs. So visualize yourself floating on a raft in the sea without any fear of falling off the raft. And there are very slow rhythms embedded in the music. And you hear them, and your body is going on this journey. And that journey is, in a sense, giving permission to the nervous system to regulate those organs again.
Hmm. Now, I mean, I'm an osteopath, so this also rings really true
Oh,
to
that
me.
will, yeah, I had forgotten that. See, yeah. So if you
We
thought
know
about long
mobile.
and mid tide, yeah, you would think about these things. That in general, so depending on the type of osteopath you are, if you're the type that says the body creates these rhythms spontaneously, if you enable the body to be safe, this is along that theme, saying not only are we enabling the body to feel safe, we're giving the signals to the nervous system through acoustic cues to go on this journey.
I'll just say a little bit more for those who are unfamiliar. One of the one of the tools we use for evaluation and treatment as an osteopath is monitoring the innate movement of each organ.
Yeah.
And so when the organ is moving and there's a specific, there's ways of measuring it through palpation. It's registering a certain flexibility, health of the organ, and then the tissues surrounding it. And when there's stagnation or stuckness in the organ, it's representative of challenges in the entire system, and that have major ramifications. And so, like, one of the things we look for is how to bring more mobility and motility
Mm-hmm.
back into the organs. And it is like, for those who've had visceral manipulation, which has a much harsher term than what it is, restoring the movement of the gut, the
Mm-hmm.
actual intestine, the innate motility of the gut can literally shift a trauma pattern so
Mm.
significantly. It's magic, and I love that you're doing that with music. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
well, you can even turn it back into polyvagal constructs as you manipulate the gut. The gut is really the primary afferent pathway through the vagus. And what happens with gut, with trauma, is that the feedback loops of the vagus through the dorsal vagus stop working. And what do you see? You see oscillations between diarrhea and constipation, or irritable bowel syndrome, what terminology you want to use, or gut pain. And what the body is requesting permission to give up its motoric defenses so that it can now regulate its viscera. And we're basically giving the body that permission. It's really quite remarkable. I can't play it on this, but it's remarkable. You basically, your body just goes into that floating state.
I love that. That's truly the place
So I
of
will tell
restoration.
you the intellectual property on this is all about creating music that utilizes endogenous bodily rhythms in the music itself.
Beautiful.
Now,
Like, yeah.
well, I was going to say, like with marching, the endogenous bodily rhythm we use is heartbeat. But this is now dealing with the rhythms that you grew up with or you worked with, these slower waves, which even if you start even to look at the wave and time it with a breath or with a voice, you're already falling asleep. You're already getting into the calmness. And like if you look at long tide, it's just going up and down. The cerebral spinal fluid has rhythms, and that's part of your profession. Now we're pumping into the body through acoustic signals those rhythms.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I am excited to when it comes out that we all get
yeah.
to
Well, stay
tune with
tuned.
it.
Stay tuned.
We will. Thank you so much, Stephen, for this beautiful conversation. And thank you all for coming in and your incredible questions and attention and attunement in this conversation on the science of safety.
Well, thank you.
And we wish you all my pleasure, Stephen.
Thank you very much for
We
inviting
will.
me. Okay, bye bye.
Bye, everyone.